Venezuela after Maduro. What happens next? Yesterday's events in Venezuela mark one of the most consequential geopolitical developments in the Western Hemisphere in decades. The capture of Nicolas Maduro by U.S. forces fundamentally reshapes Venezuela's political future and potentially the region's balance of power. Today, I want to walk through what we know so far, what comes next for Venezuela, what this means for the United States, and why the real outcome will be determined not by yesterday's operation, but by what happens over the next 6 to 18 months. What happened? The U.S. operation, while details are still emerging, the core facts are now clear. Nicolas Maduro was captured yesterday morning and transferred to a U.S. Navy vessel offshore. He is currently in U.S. custody, alongside his wife, Cilia Flores, and is expected to be brought to the United States to face trial. This was not a spontaneous operation. It was complex, deliberate, and clearly planned over a long period of time. For something like this to succeed, without casualties and without triggering immediate chaos, it would have required at least partial cooperation from elements within Venezuela's military and intelligence services. The speed and precision of the operation strongly suggest coordination behind the scenes. Senior generals and intelligence officials in Venezuela are closely monitored by the regime, which means moving this many people without detection points to deep internal fractures. The airstrikes that followed, around Caracas and along the coast, were likely aimed at disabling air defenses and offensive military capabilities. This would have ensured the safe extraction of Maduro and limited the regime's ability to retaliate. The takeaway here is simple. The Maduro regime was far more fragile than it appeared. Who takes over now? The most likely near-term outcome is not an opposition government, but a transitional government. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez appears positioned to serve as the interim figurehead. Despite rumors to the contrary, she is in Caracas. Within the regime, there seems to be a preference for her to act as a caretaker, at least initially. The relative cleanliness of the operation points to a coordinated transition rather than a collapse. That significantly reduces the risk of a power vacuum, but it does not eliminate political instability. The United States now holds substantial leverage over what happens next. The U.S. strategy and the risks from Washington's perspective, this is not yet a political win. President Trump's success will depend almost entirely on what happens next. The administration delayed action in part because of concerns over the day after, avoiding chaos, preventing regional spillovers, and ensuring that Maduro is not simply replaced by Maduro 2.0. The U.S. is signaling openness to working with a transitional government, even if it includes regime insiders. But pressure, both domestically and inside Venezuela, to move toward elections will be intense. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in particular, will be focused on pushing for a credible path to new elections. Ensuring that Venezuela eventually votes in an opposition government is critical for Trump to maintain support within the Republican Party. Beyond politics, the U.S. will be looking for concessions. Cooperation on oil and energy access, progress on migration, counter-narcotics coordination, sanctions relief is the primary leverage point, but full normalization will almost certainly require democratic elections. What comes next inside Venezuela on the ground? Most senior regime figures remain in Venezuela. That includes Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, and Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino. That limits how fast real regime change can occur, but it does not freeze the situation. The combination of U.S. pressure, street dynamics, and international expectations makes elections increasingly difficult to avoid. While near-term instability is likely, the base case remains fresh elections within 12 to 18 months. Importantly, repression will be harder this time. A transitional government seeking U.S. normalization cannot violently suppress protests the way Maduro did in the past. The streets are a key wildcard. Regional and global implications regionally, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil are the key wildcards. These governments will likely condemn the operation rhetorically while quietly managing their bilateral exposure to the U.S. Brazil, in particular, may see delays in trade and tariff negotiations with Washington, but we do not expect a lasting rupture. Cuba is the longer-term pressure point. While military action is unlikely, economic coercion, including energy pressure, is very much on the table. Globally, Both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are watching closely. In the near term, we do not expect immediate behavioral changes on Taiwan or Ukraine, but the operation complicates U.S. messaging on sovereignty. At the same time, Trump is signaling a willingness to act decisively and to use both overt and covert power. That can be destabilizing for some actors, but it may also be deterrent. Energy and markets. Venezuela's oil sector is one of the most important pieces of this puzzle. In a best-case scenario, production could rise by roughly 300,000 barrels per day per year. Even then, it would likely take 3 to 5 years to reach 2 million barrels per day. Chevron and existing operators are best positioned to scale production quickly. The biggest constraints will be political stability and confidence that the legal framework will hold. In markets, we should expect near-term volatility in oil prices, but the medium-term implications are potentially bearish if production increases meaningfully. Bond markets, particularly Venezuelan sovereign debt, are likely to react more favorably. So what's the bottom line? President Trump has framed this as a win, and tactically it is. But strategically, the hard part starts now. Removing Maduro creates enormous optionality for the United States on energy, migration, and regional influence. Whether that optionality turns into a durable success will depend on execution, not the operation itself. The next 6 to 18 months, not yesterday, will determine whether this becomes a historic turning point or a missed opportunity.